If you look on the internet, you're going to find this question quite common, and it affects most gardeners. They don't fully understand it. And that question is, why do vegetable flowers bloom, then fall off without growing? It could be that the bees didn't get to it and pollinate it, but it's much more likely your vegetable plants experience what's known as blossom drop. This can occur in many vegetable types, including tomatoes, squash, beans, and cucumbers. The blossoms fall off due to stress-related conditions. Stress can include many different possibilities or a combination of them, including too much water, excess nitrogen in your fertilization program, dry, windy conditions, and really hot or cold temperatures, especially really hot temperatures. The stress leads to non-viable pollen, which prevents pollination, and subsequently the bloom dies and falls off. Without fruit growing, there is obviously no production of fruit, especially that particular fruit. If the conditions are temporary, production will pick up again, but you've lost that production on those fruits. However, if they're sustained stressors, that can be detrimental to production, severely detrimental.
Let's look at a couple different examples. Squash normally is monoecious, meaning it has both male and female flowers on the same plant. And of course it takes, this is a male flower, and you can tell it's a male flower because there's no baby fruit on the basis of it, it's just a stem. But this is a male flower, and on the tip of that flower is pollen. I'll take my finger and get a little bit of it on here so you can see. That pollen is transferred by pollinators in the case of squash because the flowers are completely separated. It needs a vehicle to go from here to the female flower. Let me take you over here to the female flower. This is the same cultivar, Feroce Delicate, and this is a female flower, and you can tell because the baby fruit is on this. The male flower, once the pollen is taken, or actually within a day, it starts to die off. But this, if pollinated, will not die off, it will start growing. So what you have to do, or what a pollinator has to do, is put the pollen, deposit the pollen on this part of the plant here, or the flower, and that sends the chemicals down into and hormones down into the baby fruit, which begins the growth process. Now that flower, if it's not pollinated for any reason, that flower will die back and drop off, and that is a result of lack of pollination. Always a lack of result of pollination. Lack of pollination can occur for several reasons. Sometimes it's because pollinators aren't moving it from one to the other, from the male flower I just showed you to this female flower. But other times it can be because the plant is completely stressed. Well, if you look at this plant, it's gorgeous. It's not stressed. It's got ideal temperatures and good fertilizer, and everything's looking wonderful with the plant. But other times, several things can stress it. It can be too hot, causing the pollen to not be viable. Too cold, causing the pollen not to be viable. It can be too many, oh, there's a bee there. I love me some bees. Anyway, it can be a lack of, or too much nitrogen fertilizer. That's a common problem with lack of pollination. It can be insects that are just chewing the dickens out of it and the plant's trying to survive. There are a number of reasons why plants won't pollinate or fertilize the female flowers. But primarily it's because of stress versus lack of pollinators. It just so happens that right now my plants are beginning to actually bloom for the first time, so the pollinators are just now starting to come in. Blossom drop can occur in lots of different plants, mostly fruiting type. And when you say fruiting type, you don't think actually of actual fruit. Although they are actually fruits, most vegetables are actually fruits. Your eggplants and tomatoes and cucumbers and squash and everything that has fleshy substance around a seed is actually a fruit. But the green beans, like these pole beans here, that's another example that can be affected by stressors in plants and cause blossom drop. These are my peppers. They're still kind of small. They haven't started fruiting yet, but they're in the same family, the Nightshade family, as tomatoes, eggplants, and potatoes, and they can be severely affected by blossom drop. Now, peppers are a little more hardy with their pollen. It stays a little more viable than others like tomatoes, but they are certainly affected by blossom drop. This is the eggplant, another Nightshade family I just discussed, and it's got such a beautiful flower. Nightshade family plants like tomato, eggplant, pepper, they have what they call perfect flowers. Instead of the flowers being in both the male and female on the flower, the male parts and the female parts being separate, in these plants, nightshades, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they're what's called a perfect flower. They have both male and female parts on the same flower. And so the pollen is here on these little anther cones here, and they can drop onto the female part, which is in the middle of them, by several different methods. It can be pollinated. A bee can get on here and flap it's actually the shoulder muscles that vibrates. It causes pollen to drop. Wind blowing, tapping it, just any of these things in ideal temperatures, usually in the morning, can cause pollen to drop onto the stigma, the female part of the flower, and that will pollinate the female, and it'll go down into the bulb here where the baby eggplant is, in this case, and it'll begin to grow. However, even though they're on the same flower, pollination does occur more readily because it's pollinated by several different factors, unlike the squash I just showed you. They are still as severely affected by blossom drop because the pollen viability is based on stressors, especially temperatures, and of the temperatures, especially very high temperatures. And so what that does is it desiccates the pollen, clumps the pollen when it's too cold, and all kinds of other things where the pollen just won't drop. Even if bees come and try to collect it, the pollen is just not viable to pollinate the flower and begin to grow, so the flowers will drop. I'm going to show you a couple other cucurbits in the same family as squash, and one of them here is like this winter squash, butternut. Butternut is in the same family as squash, cucurbits. All squash, which includes summer squash like yellow crookneck and straight neck and patty pan and delicata, and those summer squashes, along with all winter squashes like butternut, curry, what are some others? Other machadas, pumpkins. Pumpkins can be several different species, but all those squash are all in the same family, whether it's winter or summer squash. They're all in the same general family. There are species within that family, like machata, which is butternut, pepo, which is your summer squashes and your delicatas and your acorns, and there's maximas like the Sibley and other various pumpkins. But those are all in the same family, Cucurbita. I'm going to take you to one you might not know and is in the same family. Another one in the same family are these little babies here. These are super sweet treats, and they are cantaloupe. Cantaloupe is in the Cucurbit family as well, and I think the species is mellow, C. mellow, but anyway, they won't cross with the squash, but it's in the Cucurbit family, and they are also affected by blossom drop. And on the same note as a squash, the male and females are on different same plant but different flowers. See the little stem here? That's a male. Females are just like the squash, they have a little baby on it. And right now it's the beginning of the year, I'm not seeing any females on here. The plant first starts, this particular variety first starts producing males, and I think that is because the males attract pollinators, and once the pollinators are coming in really well, the plant starts producing females. Now I think that's what's happens with this particular variety, but in either case there's two separate flowers just like the squash, and it is affected by blossom drop. Here's another Cucurbit, believe it or not, and it's also another tasty treat, another fruit, and this is watermelon. And watermelon is just like the melons I talked about. They have two separate flowers on the same plant, monoecious, and it requires the transportation of pollen from a male flower to a female fruited flower. And again, the female is always got the baby on the back behind the flower. Like instead of the stem here, it'll be a little baby watermelon. I don't see any on here just yet because these are very new plants, performing just like the melons in that they're mostly male flowers right now. They're just starting to appear. Here's another type of butternut, more or less. This is called honey nut. It's a hybrid cross of a maxima, a C. maxima, and a C. machata, buttercup and butternut. And you can see here that there is a big nice flower here with a baby fruit on the back. This is the female portion. The males, I don't see a male on here I can show you. That's another female right here, but right above it maybe a male. Let me look here. Nope, that's another female right here, and you can tell by the squash on there. These are a wonderful variety, by the way. Very sweet, gorgeous, gorgeous. Now here's another Cucurbit. This is cucumber, and cucumber has a special capability that all that I've showed you so far does not have. They're able to grow fruit without being pollinated. Now this is piccolino cucumber, and that's the size it gets when it's ready to be harvested. And this is what the babies look like. What's special about this plant is that it is parthenocarpy. It's also gynaeceous, and that means that it doesn't produce male flowers. I mean, once in a rare blue moon, gynaeceous plants will produce a male flower, but I haven't seen one on this particular variety yet. They're always female flowers growing up. And why it's so special is because it doesn't need to be pollinated. That's the beauty of parthenocarpy. If it's not pollinated, obviously there cannot be viable seed in there because it takes both male and female parts to create babies, and that's what seeds are, the next generation. Since it can't be pollinated, or it can be pollinated, but since it doesn't get pollinated, normally these would fall off. In other cucumber plants before the last 10 years or 20 years, these were required to be pollinated just like everything else I've shown you. But now, today, many varieties are coming along that are parthenocarpic. And parthenocarpic varieties, like I said, do not need to be pollinated. And the fact that they're gynaeceous and all female means high productivity and no flower drop. That's because they don't need to be pollinated. The plant chemicals, the makeup of the plant and hormones and chemicals within it start the growth process without the need for pollen to fertilize the seed. So there's no need for any pollinators. There's no need for any wind. There's no need for anything but a healthy plant. If you get a healthy plant, those little bitty fruits here will start growing. Now, what happens, and this is also part of plant makeup, is that as fruits start to mature, that'll signal to the plant it doesn't need to continue to try to grow all these other babies. So an integral part of making sure that they continue to fruit is to harvest. I don't normally do this, but I normally cut it. So when I pull this fruit off like I just did, I'm going to take that in and we're going to eat it. These other plants are going to start growing because the plant got a signal, holy mackerel. They took my fruit and I'm not going to be able to, because sometimes they get pollinated. I'm not going to be able to create the next generation, so I better start another one to growing so I can create the next generation. The plant still thinks a growing fruit is the next generation and with viable seed in it, even though there's no seed in it. So it's still kind of restricted by mature fruit. Now, cucumber, parthenocarpic cucumber is relatively new, and how well it produces and its capability is extremely unique in the vegetable world, and it has so many benefits. It's not primarily, it's not limited by stress any longer. Stress will not take out the fruit. And so that makes it a wonderful, unique plant. Parthenocarpy solves almost all blossom drop issues, almost every single one, because it doesn't need to be fertilized. And blossom drop occurs because the fruit is not fertilized. Now, cucumber is, of course, an extraordinary vegetable. For many people, it is a top vegetable. But can you imagine how awesome it would be if the #1 vegetable crop in the world, and the number 4 is what I'm hearing, the number 4 food crop in the world behind various grains like rice and corn is had the same capability as this cucumber. It was not dependent on pollination. In other words, the crop is also parthenocarpic and also capable of growing, not dependent on pollinators, not dependent on good temperatures, super healthy plants that aren't affected by disease or stressors or life shortened or dropped because of high nitrogen content. All that, those limitations also removed, just like this wonderful cucumber plant, which is becoming more and more prevalent, by the way. Most cucumbers coming out today are parthenocarpic, and obviously there's a good reason why, because the production is out of this world. But that one crop I'm telling you about now has the capability to do just like this cucumber, and I mean exactly like this cucumber, and that's tomato, and that's what I'm breeding. In my grow room that I built in I believe it was 2015, maybe 2016, I've got a few videos on it. I built this grow room specifically for a mutation in tomato that happened just like the cucumbers I just showed you. And in this grow room right now is one of the slicer tomatoes that I have developed that has that capability. It's parthenocarpic. It will always, almost always, grow a tomato as long as the plant is healthy. It's not affected by high heat. It's not affected by cold. It does not need a pollinator. It doesn't need wind. It doesn't need hand pollination. It doesn't need anything at all to start growing tomatoes. And because the tomatoes are not pollinated, they are seedless. Now that is the same as the cucumber. Everything about it's the exact same thing as that cucumber I just showed you. However, and the most important part of it is that these can be carried on, because when the temperatures are ideal and when the tomatoes are pollinated, just like the cucumber I just showed you, the parthenocarpic cucumber, they will also set seed. It is a perfect solution to high production, low stressed, I wouldn't call it low stress, but high production, almost nearly 100% growth without the worry of stressors on plants that cause blossom drop. This is one of my cultivars and a special plant I'm growing, and I'm highly stressing it under heat in the grow room right now. This is called Teddy Bear. Teddy Bear is a parthenocarpic variety I'm growing, cultivar that I developed from my original mutant line. And just like the gynaeceous plants, even though they're perfect flowers and have both male and female in here, it does not need to be pollinated. And in fact, because it's in the room here, there is hardly any movement at all. There's a little bit of movement, but all these little baby tomatoes are growing on their own in all locations, almost all locations along the plant. So this is a trial plant to demonstrate the ability and capability of parthenocarpy again. Now, I've been testing it since 2016 in every kind of environment that I can generate, and now we're moving past me into other areas, and I am trying to bring this forward as quickly as possible. This capability, in my opinion, should be bred into every cultivar worldwide, because it does nothing but improve it. Just like the cucumber is becoming, the parthenocarpic cucumber is becoming more and more popular every year that goes by because of its capability and high production without the need for pollination. This should also do the same thing for tomato. This is an ever ongoing breeding passion of mine since I first brought forth this mutation. Now the mutation came about when I was stressing plants to try and produce my own locally improved, under heat conditions, production here in central Arkansas. All I was trying to do is cross different cultivars, different varieties, to get a tomato that performed better in our hot summers. And what happened was a mutation occurred. A mutation, it was 1 in 50 different siblings, only 1 in 50 different siblings, and one of many crosses that I made, that a plant appeared with this special capability. Only 1 in 50. And all the other lines and crosses that also had 50 plants, and each one of those crosses did nothing. It was a very isolated incident, and because that mutation, since 2015 I've been crossing and breeding all kinds of tomatoes to it with the capability of being parthenocarpic, high production, and now I'm bringing disease resistance into it. But anyway, it's a never-ending passion of mine. This year I am trialing my tomatoes, which are all this way, against some commercial varieties. In this case over here, in what I call the no-weed garden, I've got Celebrity and Better Boy. I have also tested them against Big Beef, Bella Rosa, Chef's Choice Red, others, Legend, many different others, and in the last year and the year before. So this year I'm also part of proof positive that I'm giving to various interested parties right now is the comparison, video documentation of a comparison of the capability. Now right now it's mid-June and we're already in the 90s, and not every single day, but as July and August come on, this is going to be significant. I know the celebrities and the better boys are going to stop producing because they have all the time and they're limited by pollen. My parthenocarpy varieties that I've developed are not limited by pollen, so they'll continue to produce through the hottest month. And that's what's so awesome about parthenocarpy, is the ability to stop blossom drop from anything that causes blossom drop, and therefore increase production on every single plant that has the capability. And that's what's so awesome about the work I'm doing. Just wanted to share that with you. This is Brent, you guys. We'll see you later.
How long do we gotta stay?